The story of how a marriage dies never begins with the moment of confession. It begins long before that, quietly, gently, like a soft tremor beneath the earth. But when the quake finally hits, everything falls at once. For 20 years, Ethan Calder believed he and his wife Hannah lived in a world the two of them built together. A world bound by faith, patience, habit, and the kind of trust that only grows through decades of shared mornings. They were the couple people in town pointed to as an example: steady, grounded, faithful. Ethan worked as a landscape designer who loved the predictability of soil and seasons. Hannah taught music at St. Brooks Community Church, the same church where they had met, married, and later raised their daughter, Lily. She led the choir with a voice that could soften the edges of even the harshest Sunday. Their routines never changed. Coffee at 6:30. Warm, golden light in the kitchen. A quiet prayer before leaving the house. They didn't argue much. They didn't slam doors. Their life had a gentle rhythm to it, sometimes so gentle it felt like nothing could ever interrupt it. But everything breaks eventually, even the softest things. Ethan didn't notice the first signs right away. Change always begins subtly. It was only when he looked back that he saw the pattern, the quiet realignments in the universe of their marriage. Hannah stopped leaving her phone on the counter when she showered. She started wearing a new perfume, something bright, something unfamiliar. She skipped dinners, then apologized with 2 sweet smiles that didn't reach her eyes. And she had started talking, almost obsessively, about the upcoming Las Vegas Faith Conference, a church-sponsored music and worship seminar led by a group of pastors from different states. Ethan supported her attending. He thought she deserved a break from their small town and the endless routine of choir rehearsals. She left for Vegas with a suitcase full of conservative dresses and a heart full of excitement. Ethan kissed her goodbye on the driveway, unaware that this would be the last week their marriage still felt intact. When she returned 4 days later, she walked into the house looking almost luminous. Her cheeks had color. Her voice had a softness Ethan hadn't heard in years. But there was something else, too, an undercurrent he couldn't name. She spoke about the seminar, the music workshops, the networking. But every time she mentioned Reverend Mason Mercer, her tone dropped into something quieter, something Ethan couldn't place at first. Mercer was a guest pastor who had led several sessions in Vegas, a charismatic preacher known for his emotional sermons and magnetic presence. Hannah talked about him like an artist describing inspiration. At first, Ethan dismissed his concern as jealousy. But soon enough, the truth began to drip through the cracks. When Ethan met Reverend Mercer for the first time a week later at St. Brooks, he understood immediately that something was wrong. The man greeted him with a warm handshake, too warm, then added with a smile, "I've heard so much about your wife's musical devotion. You're a fortunate man, Ethan." Ethan nodded politely, but a sliver of ice slid down his spine. Mercer's tone wasn't inappropriate, but it was familiar, too familiar. Things shifted again as Christmas approached. Hannah returned home late one evening, cheeks flushed, hair slightly out of place. "Choir practice ran long," she said, slipping off her coat. Pastor Mercer needed help organizing music for the Christmas Eve service. Her explanation was smooth, perfectly reasonable. But married couples sense things. Words don't confess. 3 nights before Christmas, Hannah stood in their dimly lit living room, hands trembling as she twisted the hem of her sweater. Ethan sat across from her, reading the paper, pretending not to notice her quiet distress. "Ethan," she whispered, "there's something I need to tell you. Something that happened in Las Vegas." He lowered the paper slowly. Her voice fractured. Her eyes shone wet. I made a mistake," she said. "A terrible one." And in that moment, 20 years of marriage, 2 decades of trust, memories, routines, fractured like thin ice beneath a single step. She didn't tell him everything that night. She gave him a watered-down version, a half-truth, soaked in guilt. "It was just an emotional moment," she said. "A lapse in judgment. Nothing physical." But the tremor that started in Vegas had finally reached their home, and Ethan felt the first violent crack tear through the foundation of their life. He slept on the edge of their bed, facing the window, unable to breathe through the silence. She cried quietly beside him, as if ashamed of the sound her sorrow made. But even then, Ethan knew she hadn't told him everything. The next morning he woke to the scent of her shampoo lingering on her pillow and the cold imprint of her absence. She had left earlier than usual, leaving behind a faint trace of her perfume that now tasted like deceit. He made coffee he didn't drink and stared out the window, watching the frost glitter on the lawn he used to be proud of. Something had happened in Las Vegas. Something she couldn't bring herself to say. Something she hoped he wouldn't ask. He didn't, because asking meant hearing the truth. And the truth, he sensed, would split his world open. But denial has a short lifespan. That afternoon he saw Reverend Mercer outside the church touching Hannah's shoulder lightly as she laughed, cheeks flushed in a way Ethan hadn't seen since before Vegas. He turned away before they saw him. He didn't want to witness anything more. Ethan told himself for days that he was imagining things, that people see what they fear, not what is real. But fear sharpens vision. It makes every detail vivid, every gesture suspicious. Hannah's behavior didn't help. Whenever he tried to talk to her, she softened her voice, lowered her eyes, and gave him answers that sounded rehearsed. It was just a moment of weakness. It didn't mean anything. "You're reading too much into this." But every time she said those words, her gaze drifted away, as if the truth were hanging in the air, just behind his shoulder, waiting for her to acknowledge it. On the Sunday before Christmas, Reverend Mercer gave a sermon titled "Grace After Failure." It was supposed to be a message for the entire congregation, but it felt like it was delivered to one person only. His eyes swept over the pews until they met Hannah's. "Even the faithful stumble," he said softly, voice trembling with crafted sincerity. "Even the devoted lose their way for a moment." Hannah shifted in her seat. Her hands tightened on her hymnal. She stared down at her lap and didn't sing along with the closing hymn. After the service, Mercer approached with a smile that tried too hard to disguise discomfort. "Ethan," he said warmly. "Hannah, Merry Christmas." Ethan forced a nod. Hannah managed a thin smile. "I'll see you at the Christmas Eve service," Mercer added. "It will be meaningful." Meaningful. Ethan felt the words settle in his chest, like a stone. That evening, while hanging coats in the front hall, he felt something in the pocket of Hannah's beige wool coat. A folded piece of paper. Light, soft, intimate. He pulled it out slowly. A note, written in Reverend Mercer's handwriting. short, but unmistakably personal. Your voice stays with me even when I try to silence it. We must speak again. There was no mention of God, faith, or guidance, nothing that would make it pastoral. It was the kind of note a man writes to a woman he should have stayed away from. Ethan stood frozen in the hall, the hum of Christmas lights in the living room whispering behind him. The house smelled like cinnamon and rosemary. Hannah had been cooking all afternoon. But suddenly everything felt rotten beneath the surface. He didn't confront her, not immediately. Some part of him still clung to the hope that she would come clean on her own. The next night, Christmas Eve, their daughter Lily arrived home from college. She walked into the house bright and glowing, utterly unaware of the storm raging beneath the surface. "Mom, Dad," she called, embracing them both. "It feels so good to be home." Hannah wiped her eyes before turning to Lily, but Lily didn't notice. She talked about finals, dorm drama, her plans to apply for an internship in the city. Hannah smiled through all of it, holding on to her daughter like a life raft. But Ethan watched the shadows behind Hannah's smile, watched the exhaustion carved into her face, watched the guilt she carried like a stone in her chest. On Christmas Eve morning, the house was alive with the sound of baking and carols. But beneath it all, the heaviness grew thicker. Ethan tried, he really tried, to pretend. For Lily's sake. For tradition's sake. But by the time they reached the church for the Christmas Eve service, his heart was so tight, he could barely breathe. The sanctuary was filled with soft candlelight, evergreen garlands, and the warm murmur of familiar hymns. Hannah stepped up to the front with the choir, and when she sang the opening verse of "O Holy Night," her voice trembled, not with emotion, but with something like grief. Her eyes flicked toward Mercer once, no more than a fraction of a second. But it was enough to confirm everything. After the service, Mercer approached again, wearing his pastoral smile, the one that hid more than it revealed. "Beautiful singing tonight, Hannah," he said softly. Ethan felt the last thread holding him together snap. That night at home, while Lily hung stockings and talked about childhood memories, Ethan excused himself and went to the hall, where he reached into Hannah's coat pocket again. The note was still there, and that was when he knew. She had kept it, deliberately. She wanted it close to her. She wanted to remember. He didn't sleep that night. He lay awake, listening to the quiet rhythm of the house, staring at the ceiling as the glow of Christmas lights flickered faintly through the doorway. He waited for dawn, waited for courage, waited for the moment he would force the truth into the open. It came on Christmas morning. The living room was bright with the soft gold of early light. Presents waited under the tree. Coffee brewed in the kitchen. Lily sat cross-legged on the floor in her pajamas, smiling, innocent to everything about to unfold. Hannah entered holding a tray of pastries, trying to look like the perfect mother and perfect wife in the perfect Christmas morning scene. That was when Ethan cleared his throat. He raised his mug, a toast, an unusual gesture at breakfast, but no one questioned it. Not yet. "I'd like to say something," he said, voice steady but cold. Hannah froze. Lily looked up curiously. Ethan took a slow breath. "I want to talk about honesty, about truth, about what happens when two people stop telling each other the things that matter." Hannah's face drained of color. "Ethan," she whispered, pleading already. "Please." "No," he said. "You will tell our daughter the truth. Right now." Lily blinked, confusion swirling in her eyes. Mom? Dad? What's going on? Hannah shook her head, tears gathering. Not today. Please, not on Christmas. Ethan's jaw tightened. You tell her, he said, voice shaking with pain and fury. Or I will. The silence that followed was suffocating. Hannah's lips trembled as she tried to speak. But the lies wouldn't come this time. The truth was too heavy. Finally she whispered, barely audible, I made a mistake. In Las Vegas. Lily's expression shifted from confusion to horror. Mom, what do you mean? Ethan stepped back, arms crossed, watching as the truth pulled itself from Hannah's throat. I had an emotional connection, she stammered, with Reverend Mercer. It shouldn't have happened, but I— Tell the whole truth, Ethan demanded, not the watered-down version. Hannah covered her face with her hands. It wasn't just emotional, she choked out. I slept with him. And just like that, Christmas morning shattered. Lily's eyes filled instantly with tears. Her breath hitched. She stared at her mother as though she were seeing a stranger. Mom, Lily whispered, how could you? Hannah broke into sobs, reaching for her daughter. But Lily leaned away. Ethan watched all of it. Her confession, Lily's devastation, the collapse of the family he had spent 20 years building, and felt a strange mixture of rage and relief. The truth was finally out. The wound was open. There was no going back. And yet, beneath all the noise, he felt a quiet certainty settle within him. Their marriage had died in Las Vegas. Christmas morning was simply the burial. The house felt colder after Hannah's confession, as though the walls themselves recoiled from her words. Lily stormed into her room, slamming the door hard enough to shake the ornaments on the tree. Hannah stood in the living room, trembling, her hands covering her face, breath coming in sharp, broken gasps. Ethan didn't comfort her. He couldn't. Something inside him had finally snapped. You destroyed us, he said quietly. And you did it while holding a Bible in your hands? Hannah looked up, eyes swollen, pleading. Ethan, please. It wasn't what you think. It wasn't love. I was lost. You needed him, Ethan shot back. A pastor? While you were representing our church, our family? While you told me that Vegas was a spiritual retreat? Hannah winced. I didn't plan for anything to happen. But you let it happen. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Her silence was more honest than anything she could have said. Ethan walked past her and went to the window, staring out at the snow-covered porch. He felt hollow, like grief had carved out his insides and left nothing behind except a sharp, echoing emptiness. He heard her footsteps behind him, tentative, careful. Please don't walk away from us, she whispered. Don't walk away from me. He turned slowly. I'm not walking away, he said. You already shoved me out. Her knees buckled, and she sat heavily on the edge of the couch. The tray of Christmas pastries still waited on the coffee table, untouched, forgotten, meaningless. The smell of cinnamon that usually made Ethan think of warmth and home now felt sickeningly artificial. Ethan, she whispered again, what do you want me to do? I'll do anything. Tell me why, he said. Tell me why him. Hannah wiped her cheeks, but more tears followed instantly. I don't know, she said. He noticed me. He listened. He saw the parts of me I thought were gone. Ethan let out a bitter laugh. Of course he did. Predators always know what to look for. He's not a predator, she protested weakly. He slept with a married woman from his congregation, Ethan snapped. That's exactly what he is. The truth hung between them like smoke. Hannah looked down at her trembling hands. "I was afraid to tell you," she whispered. "I didn't want to lose you. You lost me the moment you chose him." Silence. Just the quiet ticking of the old wooden clock on the mantel. Hannah curled her knees up to her chest, like a child. "Ethan, please don't hate me." Ethan closed his eyes. "I don't hate you. I just don't know who you are anymore." The rest of Christmas Day passed like a funeral. Lily refused to come out of her room, except once to grab her coat and leave the house altogether. Hannah lay curled up on the sofa, shaking every time she heard a car pass outside, as if expecting Mercer to show up at the door. Ethan packed a small suitcase that evening. "You're leaving?" Hannah whispered, voice hoarse. "Yeah, just for a few days." "Where will you go?" "Somewhere quiet." She swallowed hard. "Please, let me explain more. There's more you don't know." He froze mid-step. "No," he said firmly. "I don't want to hear more. Not tonight. Not anymore." He walked toward the door, but Hannah stood up suddenly, grabbing his arm with trembling fingers. "I regret it," she whispered. "Every second of it. I swear to you." Ethan stepped back, pulling his arm away gently. "You regret getting caught," he said. "Not the act. Not him." The words landed like a slap, and Hannah gasped softly, hand going to her heart. He left the house, the cold air hitting his face like a punishment and a relief at once. He rented a small studio apartment in a quiet part of town. Sparse, empty, peaceful. No lingering scent of Hannah's perfume. No hymns drifting from the kitchen. No reminders of the life they had built together. On the first night, he lay on the unfamiliar bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to silence instead of shattered trust. He didn't answer Hannah's calls. Not the first 3. Not the 4th. By the 7th voicemail, her voice broke. "Ethan, please don't shut me out. You were my best friend before you were my husband. Let me talk to you. Please." He deleted the message. He needed air, space, time to feel the full weight of betrayal without anyone trying to soften it. Still, he couldn't help it. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Hannah in Vegas, her laughing at a joke she shouldn't have laughed at, her leaning in a little too close, her making a choice that didn't include him. The images gnawed at him like spiders crawling beneath his skin. Back at church, the fallout was immediate. When Ethan showed up alone the following Sunday, murmurs floated through the pews. People whispered behind hymnals. Eyes followed him like shadows. A deacon pulled him aside after the service. "Is everything all right? We heard rumors." "Rumors?" Ethan echoed. "That your wife is spending time with Reverend Mercer?" Ethan didn't respond. He didn't need to. His silence was confirmation enough. Within a week, Mercer announced he was taking a temporary sabbatical for personal reflection. Translation: he was hiding. Hannah attended one last choir rehearsal before resigning. Her face was pale, her shoulders sunken. She walked out of the church with her head lowered, as though ashamed to look anyone in the eye. Lily refused to return Hannah's calls entirely. The woman who once stood in front of children teaching songs about grace had become the center of a scandal she couldn't escape. One cold February afternoon, Hannah showed up at Ethan's studio apartment. He opened the door and stared at her for a long moment before stepping aside. She looked smaller somehow, defeated, carrying her guilt like an anchor around her neck. "I'm leaving," she said softly. "I got a teaching job near my sister's place in Colorado. I can't stay here anymore." Ethan nodded. It made sense. The town was too small, the whispers too loud. Before walking out, she paused at the doorway. "I pray for you every night," she whispered. "Not for forgiveness, just for peace." Then she left, taking her perfume and her guilt with her, leaving behind only a ghost. Spring came like a slow exhale. Ethan started running every morning along the river. The motion cleared his mind, helped him breathe deeper. Lily visited often, sitting on his couch with a cup of tea, asking questions she wasn't ready to hear the answers to. "Do you think Mom ever loved him?" Lily asked once. "I think she didn't know what she loved," Ethan said quietly. Not even herself. By early summer, the sharpness of betrayal dulled into something gentler. Not forgiveness, just distance. He stopped avoiding the places he and Hannah used to go, stopped flinching at her name, stopped giving her ghost space in his daily life. And one warm July evening, he finally opened an old envelope, a letter Hannah had sent from Colorado. Her handwriting trembled. Her words were raw. For the first time, Ethan believed she had written them, not to win him back, but to make peace with herself. "Grace," she wrote, "is not for the righteous. It is for the broken. I have learned that the hard way." He folded the letter carefully, placed it back in the envelope, and set it aside. He felt no hatred, just acceptance. The past was no longer something to escape. It was something he could walk away from without looking back. By August, Ethan had carved out a new rhythm in life, a rhythm that wasn't defined by betrayal or the weight of unanswered questions. It was quieter, slower, and strangely grounding. He woke before dawn each day, made himself a cup of coffee, and sat by the window as the sky shifted from navy to soft pink. Sometimes he read. Sometimes he simply watched the light arrive without thought or expectation. He volunteered twice a week at an animal shelter, walking dogs who needed more patience than strength. Their uncomplicated loyalty steadied him in ways he didn't know he needed. People noticed the change in him, not a dramatic transformation, but a kind of softening, as though the frost around him had begun to melt. Hannah's name still floated around the church sometimes, spoken in half-whispers, but it no longer struck him like a knife. It was just another thread of the town's gossip, no longer attached to him, no longer carrying the same sting. He felt clean, not healed, not entirely, but clean. The scars were still there, but they didn't bleed anymore. The graduation ceremony. Lily's graduation ceremony arrived on a warm June afternoon. Ethan ironed the only suit he hadn't worn since the Christmas disaster and drove to the school gymnasium with steady hands. He saw her before she saw him. Hannah stood near the back of the gym, her hair shorter now, her posture different. Straighter, yet more careful. She wore a simple blue dress and held a small bouquet of flowers. Shock flickered across her face when their eyes met, followed by something softer. Recognition, but not longing, not regret, just recognition. Hannah approached him slowly, as though afraid a sudden movement might break something fragile between them. "Hi," she said quietly. "Hi. You look well," she added. "So do you." It wasn't a lie. Colorado had done something to her, smoothed the sharp edges, softened the desperation that had clung to her in the aftermath. A few seconds passed in silence, not uncomfortable but undeniably delicate. Lily spotted them both and hurried over, her cap slightly crooked, her smile enormous. She threw her arms around Ethan first, then Hannah. For a moment, The three of them stood together in something that wasn't quite a family, but wasn't broken either. After the ceremony, someone asked to take a photo of the three of them. They stood shoulder to shoulder, smiling, creating the kind of picture that looked ordinary on the surface, yet carried a long, heavy story behind it. A story that would never be told to the outside world. A story that belonged only to them. A quiet conversation. When the crowds thinned and Lily went off with her classmates, Ethan and Hannah found themselves alone near the edge of the parking lot. The summer air was warm, the sky cloudless, the moment strangely peaceful. "I wasn't sure if you'd be willing to speak to me," Hannah said. "I wasn't sure either," Ethan admitted. She nodded, accepting the answer without argument. After a moment, she took a slow breath. "Ethan, thank you. For today. For not hating me." He looked at her, really looked. Not at the woman who betrayed him, not at the ghost of their marriage, but at the person she had become after everything fell apart. "I don't hate you," he said. "I don't think I ever truly did. Anger isn't the same thing." "What is it then?" she whispered. "Pain," he answered, "and disappointment, and grief." She closed her eyes briefly, tears gathering at the edges. "I deserved every part of that." "Maybe," he said softly, "but you've carried your own punishment longer than I ever could have given you." Hannah looked at him with something like awe, something like heartbreak. "You've changed," she whispered. "So have you." They stood quietly for a moment. Then, almost shyly, Hannah said, "I finally understand something. It took so long, and I'm still ashamed it took a catastrophe to learn it." She hesitated. "Grace isn't something you receive from someone else. It's something you have to grow into." Ethan nodded slowly. He understood. "I'm glad you learned that," he said. "Truly." She wiped at her cheek, embarrassed by her tears. "Thank you for not turning this into a battlefield. You could have." "No," he said simply. "I couldn't. Fighting doesn't fix anything, and it doesn't undo what happened." They stood there for a long moment, neither of them speaking. Then Ethan exhaled softly. "I hope you're doing better now," he said. "I am," she whispered. "And I hope you are too." He smiled gently. "I am." There was no dramatic goodbye, no rekindled spark, no hidden desire, just two people acknowledging the truth of what they were and what they no longer were. Hannah placed a hand briefly on his arm, not possessive, not longing, just grateful. "Take care of yourself, Ethan." "You too, Hannah." She walked away, her steps light, her posture unburdened. Ethan watched her go until she disappeared into the growing dusk. For the first time since the night of her confession, he felt an ease wash over him. Quiet, steady, real. It was done. Not forgotten. Not erased. But done. Epilogue. What remains? Months passed. Ethan continued volunteering, continued running, continued rebuilding, one small habit at a time. His life wasn't extraordinary, but it was honest. And honesty, he learned, was more valuable than comfort. Sometimes he thought about his old pastor's sermon, Mercer's words about grace, spoken long before the truth surfaced. Grace for the broken, grace for the ones who fall, grace for those who bury their secrets, grace for those who suffer because of them. Ethan finally understood what Mercer himself never truly lived. Grace is not permission. Grace is not denial. Grace is the courage to face the truth and survive it. And Ethan had survived. Love didn't kill their marriage. Neglect did. Silence did. the tiny, unspoken fractures that no one bothered to mend. The wound became a scar, and the scar became a reminder, not of pain, but of growth. One late autumn morning, Ethan stood outside his small apartment, coffee steaming in his hands, watching the sun rise over the quiet neighborhood. He didn't think of Hannah. He didn't think of Mercer. He didn't think of Vegas or betrayal or the life that had crumbled. He thought of honesty and the way it rebuilds a person from the inside out. He closed his eyes and breathed in the cold air. He wasn't healed, but he was whole, and that was enough.